I know you're sitting there, leaning in, expecting a quaint little tale about a sweet old lady and a misunderstood fortune. But tell me this. What happens when the pillar of your family, the woman whose hands knitted your baby blanket and whose eyes held the wisdom of a century, is actually the most calculated predator you've ever met? When does the delicate line between senility and strategy dissolve into a chilling pattern of malice? And most importantly, when you're the only one who sees the monster behind the soft smile, who will ever believe you? They won't, they can't, but I know the truth. This is the kind of twisted, gut-wrenching betrayal that we unravel every week here on Behind Closed Doors, where the greatest scandals aren't found in the tabloids, but right in the high-ceilinged, velvet-curtained rooms of the people who raised us. If you've ever felt like you were the crazy one, if your gut is screaming liar, but everyone else is humming saint, then this channel is your sanity check. Do yourself a favor, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell so you don't miss a single shocking installment of these family chronicles. Tonight, we start with a story that changed my life, titled, She Faked Dementia for $10 million, the Gaslighting Granny Exposed. I can still smell the cold, sterile air of the law firm's conference room, a scent that forever reminds me of expensive leather and impending doom. My name is Eleanor, and I was, until that Monday, just another granddaughter, albeit one who worked too much and called too little. The reason for the emergency family summit was simple, brutal, and delivered without preamble by a doctor with eyes as flat as his clipboard. Edith has officially been diagnosed with advanced cognitive decline, dementia. The management of her assets needs to be immediately transitioned. The words hit the room not with a bang, but with the sickening sound of 20 vultures sharpening their beaks. My cousins, the entire flock of them, who hadn't darkened Grandma Edith's door in years, practically lunged across the polished mahogany table. I watched the greed bloom, an ugly, visible rash on their faces. The house. My cousin Mark, a man whose ambition vastly outpaced his income, didn't even bother to whisper. The $10 million log cabin on Lake Tahoe. We have to sell it, now, to cover the astronomical care costs. $10 million. The house wasn't just a property. It was the sacred ground of our family, built by my great-grandfather, a place where Edith, my grandmother, was queen. It was the last towering symbol of her control. And just like that, they were ready to liquidate her kingdom, justifying it with the clinical cruelty of medical necessity. My stomach turned. It wasn't about the money for me, it was the principle, the sheer, disgusting speed of their betrayal. I was the lone voice, the only one who wanted to keep the house, to protect Edith, who, after all, was the patient here. But my objections were dismissed with a collective sigh and the familiar, condescending roll of eyes. Eleanor, you're not a financial contributor, Mark stated, his voice dripping with false pity. You're emotional. This is about logic and medical advice. I was the digital entrepreneur, the coder, the one who saw patterns. But in this room, I was nothing but the naive, sentimental outsider, trying to argue against the cold, hard logic of profit in a doctor's diagnosis. I felt the immense weight of the family narrative pressing down on me, poor, confused Edith, greedy, well-meaning relatives. But my internal monologue, that relentless, cynical voice, screamed a different story. Something was profoundly wrong. I looked past the lawyers and the squabbling cousins toward the head of the table where Grandma Edith sat. She was a picture of frail, bewildered innocence, soft gray hair, hands trembling slightly as she clutched a lace handkerchief. A perfect performance. Then our eyes met. And for a split second, the performance vanished. The tremor stopped. Her eyes, those deep blue eyes that had once sparkled with genuine mischief, were now utterly clear, focused, and utterly terrifying. Her head barely moved, but her lips did, forming a thin, barely audible whisper that only I could hear above the cacophony of financial planning. Don't you dare interfere with this, Eleanor. You will lose everything. The sheer, venomous clarity of that threat, emerging from the mask of a helpless, demented old woman, was a physical blow. It wasn't the ramblings of a confused mind, it was a calculated warning from a sharp-witted adversary. The blood drained from my face. My breath caught in my throat, not in fear, but in the white-hot realization that the diagnosis wasn't the tragedy. It was the weapon. My grandmother wasn't sick. She was staging the ultimate power play, using the cruel shroud of dementia to orchestrate her final, most devastating act of manipulation. This entire crisis was a setup. The moral dichotomy was stark. The world saw the victim. I saw the mastermind. The silence from my end was not agreement, but the paralyzing calm before a storm, the intense, frightening focus of a hunter who has finally spotted their quarry. The battle wasn't against her decline. It was against her terrifying, razor-sharp intent. I wouldn't let them sell the house, and I sure as hell wouldn't let her get away with this. Not because of the money, but because she had chosen me as her final, glorious victim. I had to stop her. The emergency meeting adjourned, leaving behind a wake of satisfied, calculating smiles. They had won the first round. The house was marked for liquidation within 90 days. But they underestimated me. They saw the tech geek who didn't care about cash. I was the tech geek who saw the glitch in the system. As a software developer, my strength was recognizing anomalies, tracing them back to the root code. And the root code of Edith's illness had too many bugs. I flashed back to 2 weeks prior. Eleanor, dear, could you remind me what your name is again? Oh, this dreadful memory. Followed by a few minutes later, Eleanor, I need you to run to the grocery store. It's the usual route, and the PIN for the American Express is 4766. Not a word of this to your cousins. She could forget her granddaughter's name, but not a 4-digit financial code or the complex logistics of her favorite gourmet market. And then there was the phrase, the constant, cryptic refrain she'd murmur in the quiet moments. The sole inheritor. The old will must protect the sole inheritor. She was talking to herself, but her eyes, those chillingly clear eyes, always darted to me immediately after. It wasn't confusion, it was planting a seed of fear, a perverse form of subtle psychological torture. No private detective would take this case seriously, not when the evidence was anecdotal, buried under a mountain of medical records signed by a reputable doctor. They would call me paranoid, resentful, a disgruntled heir. So I decided I would be my own detective. This wasn't a case for blurry photos and cheap wiretaps. This was a job for pure, untraceable technology. I drove straight back to my condo, pulling up the blueprints for the Lake Tahoe cabin in one browser window and the darkest corners of the online surveillance market in another. My specialty was embedded systems and miniaturization. I wasn't going to install cheap security cameras. I needed an invisible web of eyes and ears. I bought 5 sets of miniature, high-definition cameras, each one smaller than a thumbnail, designed to run on a low-power, dedicated Wi-Fi network. The next 48 hours were a blur of soldering, coding, and careful concealment. One went into the antique grandfather clock in the living room, perfectly nestled behind the brass pendulum, a dark, silent eye watching the entire room. Another was meticulously built into a framed photograph of my dead grandfather, perched on her bedside table, the ultimate ironic surveillance tool. A dead man's portrait watching his wife's deception. The last 3 were distributed between the kitchen, the study, and the hallway, each one a silent sentry, streaming a flawless encrypted feed to a dedicated laptop I planned to leave running miles away. I was setting up a competence porn wobby masterclass, utilizing my unique skills against the most subtle of enemies. I was building a digital fortress, not to keep people out, but to see what was happening. Behind closed doors. The family's next move was exactly what I'd predicted. Isolation. They needed to control the narrative, and I was the unpredictable element. Mark called, his voice slick with manufactured concern. Eleanor, darling, the doctor says Edith needs familiar surroundings but round-the-clock supervision. And honestly, we need peace of mind. Since you're so sentimental about the house, why don't you move in? Be her caretaker. We'll pay you minimum wage, of course. It was a cage dressed in the guise of family duty. They were leveraging my attachment to the house and my moral obligation to a seemingly helpless old woman, all while isolating me from my professional life and resources. They had me boxed in. And then came the final petty blow. Oh, and the doctor thinks the little phone is too much stimulation for her. All the ringing, the bright light. Why don't you just leave it at home, Ellie? Focus on Gran. They were taming the technologist by stripping her of her primary tool. They wanted me cut off. I agreed. Not because I was resigned, but because their cage was exactly where I needed to be. The isolation was an advantage. Living in that $10 million tomb, under the constant watchful eye of my fake demented grandmother, was the perfect cover. I packed a small bag, leaving my work phone and laptop except for the hidden surveillance hub, the one they knew nothing about, at my condo. That night, I moved into the Lake Tahoe house. It was vast, silent, and permeated with the thick, cloying smell of old money, dust, and something else, unspoken lies. I was officially the live-in caregiver for my own grandmother, the last line of defense for a family I was beginning to truly despise. The grand cabin, with its towering stone fireplace and cathedral ceilings, was the ultimate irony. A monument to family unity, now the stage for a private, terrifying war. The moment the front door clicked shut behind me, the air shifted. I was trapped, but I was also perfectly positioned. It took only 48 hours in the house for me to get my first sickening piece of unassailable evidence. I'd been spending my days in a meticulously crafted dance of fake patience and dutiful care, enduring Grandma Edith's theatrical bouts of confusion and the maddening repetition of simple questions. Then, at 2 a.m., safe in the tiny, unused maid's room, I slipped my dedicated encrypted laptop from its hiding spot under the floorboard, connected to the secure network I'd established, and opened the feed. The screen flickered to life, showing the silent, dark interior of the house. I jumped to the camera in the grandfather clock. The scene was still. But then, a soft movement. Grandma Edith emerged from her bedroom. No shuffling, no confused stumbling. She moved with the decisive, graceful gait of a woman half her age, clad in a silk dressing gown. She walked directly to the mahogany desk in the study. I zoomed in on the portrait camera. Her face, bathed in the cool blue glow of the desk lamp she'd just turned on, was completely, terrifyingly lucid. Her lips weren't trembling. They were set in a hard, determined line. She pulled out a drawer and retrieved a small, burner cell phone. Not the expensive landline the family knew about, but a cheap, untraceable prepaid device. I held my breath, the silence in my tiny room deafening. She dialed, the click of the buttons sharp and clear on the feed's microphone. "It's done," she hissed into the phone, her voice low and gravelly, the voice of a crime boss, not a little old lady. The meeting went perfectly. Eleanor is here now, the poor, sweet thing. Acting as my nurse. She's isolated. But we have to move faster. The will needs to be signed, this week. Get the revised documents ready. She paused, listening. Her face hardened into a sneer of pure contempt. "Oh, the house? Let them sell it. It's a distraction. The point isn't the 10 million, you fool. The point is control. They all think I'm losing my mind, which means they're losing theirs. They'll fight over the scraps while the true prize goes to the only recipient who deserves it." She chuckled, a dry, terrifying sound that held no humor, only cold, absolute power. Then, the true shock. She walked over to her bedside table not for a glass of water, but for a medicine bottle labeled sedatives for dementia-related anxiety. She opened it, walked to the bathroom, and dumped the entire contents, over a dozen pills, straight down the toilet. Then, she rinsed the bottle, put it back, and walked calmly back to bed. Bam! The evidence was undeniable. My grandmother was not just faking dementia. She was actively managing the entire scenario, using her prescribed medication as a stage prop. The micro-twist hit me with the force of a train. Her objective wasn't simple financial gain for herself. It was a grander, more sinister game of psychological warfare. She wanted to exert absolute final control, to watch her greedy family members tear themselves apart, only to discover at the last moment that they had all been cut out, leaving the entire estate to some mysterious charitable fund. It wasn't about the money. It was about the power of silence. Enforced through absolute theatrical deception, she was humiliating them from beyond the grave, or rather from behind the guise of a mental breakdown. I had the proof, the smoking gun. But the euphoria of the discovery was immediately replaced by a chilling new terror. I was living alone with a criminal mastermind who had no compunctions about faking a life-altering illness and destroying her family. My isolation, which I had sought, was now a liability. I had to get the evidence out, but the family had stripped me of my communications. I spent the next day living on a razor's edge, my smile fixed, my compliance a meticulous lie. Edith, sensing a shift in my demeanor, intensified her performance. She would call me Susan, my deceased mother's name, then immediately correct herself with a sickly sweet apology. She was testing me, pushing me to break, to show a reaction, and then she found it. The camera, or at least she suspected something. I was in the kitchen when I heard a crash from the living room. I rushed in, and my blood ran cold. Grandma Edith was on the floor, next to the heavy, overturned antique grandfather clock. Her arm was twisted awkwardly beneath her, and a tiny, thin line of blood was welling up from a scratch on her cheek. She wasn't screaming. She was whimpering, staring at the ceiling with wide, terrified eyes. But when her eyes flickered to me, they were ice. "Eleanor," she gasped, her voice the thin, weak sound of a true victim. "Oh, thank God you're here. I saw a shadow. I thought it was Mark. He was screaming about the house. I tried to run. You pushed me, didn't you, dear? You were so angry about the money." My heart slammed against my ribs. It was a perfect calculated. She had seen something. Near the clock, a misplaced cable, a glint of light, and immediately turned the situation to her advantage. She had hurt herself, staged a fall, and was now actively, immediately gaslighting me, creating a false narrative of elder abuse. The doorbell rang. It was Mark, my cousin, with my aunt in tow. They must have been waiting nearby, alerted by an unknown prearranged signal. Mark took one look at the overturned clock, the blood, and Edith's terrified whimpering, and his eyes narrowed into slits of righteous fury. "What in God's name did you do, Eleanor?" He spat, rushing to my grandmother's side. I stood there, paralyzed, my mind racing. I had video evidence proving her deceit, but she had instant, bloody, undeniable visual evidence of my supposed crime. It was my word against the frail, injured victim. The power dynamic had instantly reversed. Mark didn't call the doctor first. He called the police. "Elder abuse," he yelled into the phone, his voice echoing in the grand, deceitful house. "My cousin Eleanor attacked my grandmother. She's injured. Send a squad immediately." The stakes had just skyrocketed beyond the $10 million house. I was no longer fighting for property. I was fighting for my freedom. My grandmother, the gaslighting granny, had set the trap, and I had walked right into her gilded cage. I was facing prison, my entire life destroyed, all because I had dared to see the truth. The beautiful cabin, the symbol of family legacy, had become a terrifying, opulent crime scene, and I was the prime suspect. I knew then. I couldn't just expose her. I had to utterly, legally, and definitively defeat her. If you thought the situation was dire after the grand performance in the living room, you haven't been paying attention. A great con artist, and believe me, Granny Edith was the greatest of them all, doesn't just set one trap, she sets a series of interlocking, beautifully designed traps. The police siren wail, growing louder as it echoed off the majestic, unforgiving pines of Lake Tahoe, wasn't just a sound. It was the soundtrack to the definitive moment where my life became a true crime episode. I was standing in the opulent, deceptive glow of the stone fireplace, my hands shaking not from guilt but from the searing, white-hot fury of being framed, of walking into a setup orchestrated by the woman who taught me how to bake apple pie. Mark, the self-appointed CEO of the Let's Liquidate Grandma campaign, was kneeling by Edith, performing an utterly convincing display of shock and protective indignation. "It's okay, Grandma," he cooed, dramatically examining the shallow scratch on her face. "The police are coming. She won't hurt you again." My Aunt Patricia was already on the phone with a lawyer, spewing hyperbolic descriptions of the assault, the unprovoked violence, and the traumatized senior citizen. They were building a case against me faster than I could process the gravity of the situation. I was facing felony elder abuse charges. Forget the $10 million. I was about to lose my freedom, my career, my entire future, all because I'd seen the monster behind the lace handkerchief. But in that instant, amidst the chaos, my coder's brain kicked in. When you hit a critical system failure, you don't panic. You run the diagnostic. Anomalies. Edith hadn't sustained a serious injury. It was a cosmetic cut, probably self-inflicted with a fingernail or a piece of the broken clock. The clock itself, the grandfather clock, it was the heart of my surveillance system. I had to know if the camera inside was still operational, if the SD card containing the last 48 hours of chilling evidence, including the 2:00 a.m. burner phone call and the pill dump, was intact. I let the dramatic language wash over me. The accusations, the tears, the phone calls. My response was not defensive, but coldly analytical. The power of silence was my only defense now. Every word I spoke would be a weapon for them. "I didn't touch her," I stated simply, my voice low and steady, piercing the hysterical noise. "She fell near the clock." Mark snorted. "Save it for the police, Eleanor. You're unhinged. Always have been. Too much time on those computers." The police arrived, Two local officers who looked utterly overwhelmed by the gilded surroundings and the hysterical, well-dressed accusers. The scene was perfectly set: the frail, trembling elderly woman, the concerned, wealthy relatives, and the sullen, pale granddaughter standing over the wreckage. I was already guilty in their eyes. While one officer interviewed Edith, whose voice had regained that perfectly pitched, quavering softness of the traumatized, the other, Officer Davis, asked me for my side. This was my moment. The inciting action of my counteroffensive. "Officer," I said, meeting his gaze directly, "my grandmother has been officially diagnosed with severe dementia. I'm here as her primary caretaker. My concern is not just the fall, but the management of her affairs. I believe there is a serious case of financial misconduct and manipulation occurring here, and I'm the only one trying to stop it." He looked at me with bored skepticism. "Ma'am, we're here about the assault." "And I'm telling you there was no assault." "Look at her," I whispered, gesturing towards Edith, who was now being helped to her feet by my aunt. "She just told you I pushed her because I was angry about the money. Now, let me tell you what she told me 2 weeks ago. She mentioned the key PIN for her American Express card, but she claims not to know my own name. She can forget her granddaughter but remember a 4-digit financial code? That's not dementia, officer. That's a pattern." The officer paused. The slight hesitation was all I needed. I had planted the seed of doubt. I quickly added, "I'm a software engineer. I'm not crazy. I just have a high tolerance for anomaly detection. I urge you, before anyone is charged with anything, to look closely at the circumstances. And I need to access my work equipment, my dedicated laptop, which is miles away. They stripped me of my phone so I couldn't call for help." The accusation of being cut off, coupled with the mention of the PIN and my professional background, competence porn, gave him pause. He didn't arrest me immediately. Instead, he separated Mark and my aunt and told them they needed a formal statement from the hospital. The immediate threat of the handcuffs faded, replaced by the chilling realization that my cousins had planned this brilliantly. This entire theatrical production was designed to remove me from the house, destroy my credibility, and get me locked up before I could expose Edith's plot. I was given a temporary reprieve, allowed to stay under the condition that I was confined to the maid's room, pending a full investigation. This was still a win. I was still inside the system, and my digital evidence was safe. That night, huddled in the cramped maid's quarters, the smell of mildew and forgotten things, a stark contrast to the mansion's opulent main rooms, I went back to the hidden laptop. I had managed to discreetly recover the SD card from the grandfather clock while Officer Davis was taking Mark's statement in the kitchen. The evidence was safe. Now I needed to formulate a plan that moved beyond simple exposure to legal victory. I cannot show this video to the police or my family, not yet. If I simply show them Edith being lucid, they will claim the video is doctored, or that she has lucid moments that don't invalidate the dementia diagnosis or the elder abuse claim. I'll still be arrested, and the video will be suppressed as evidence from a biased and mentally unstable suspect. I have to find a legal channel, a mechanism that forces her to either drop the act or expose her entire conspiracy under oath. This called for a professional, a mercenary. Someone who understood the venomous nature of family law and probate battles. A private investigator was pointless, but a lawyer, a shark, was essential. Using the minimal security of the maid's room, Wi-Fi, a network they hadn't bothered to secure because they thought I was techless, I started researching. I didn't search for a family lawyer, I searched for a probate litigator with a reputation for merciless, high-stakes combat against white-collar fraud. I bypassed the shiny, expensive firms and found a name that kept coming up in the darkest corners of legal forums. Mr. Silas Thorne. Oh. He was infamous, a man who charged astronomical fees but had a near-perfect track record in invalidating wills and exposing guardianship fraud. He didn't care about my moral outrage. He cared about winning. I sent him an encrypted, anonymous email containing a single, compelling snippet of the 2 a.m. video, the moment Edith dumped the sedatives down the toilet. I included the full context, the Tahoe property value, the dementia diagnosis, the elder abuse frame-up, and the chilling detail of the vice sole inheritor. In the original will, my email concluded with a simple sentence: I need you to expose a calculated conspiracy using the very laws designed to protect the vulnerable. Thorne replied within an hour. His reply was not emotional, not sympathetic, but chillingly pragmatic. I see the pattern, Eleanor. You're playing chess against a master. You can't win with a pawn. You need a queen. My retainer is non-negotiable. If you want me in, you need to prove you have the means to pay and a secure way to deliver the full video evidence without leaving the house. It was a test. Competence porn, round 2. The entire family believed I was broke and isolated, focused on the sentiment of the house. They didn't know I had been successfully trading microcap tech stocks for years, building a small but significant liquid portfolio. I wired him the retainer, a figure so enormous it made my hands tremble, but the cost of my freedom was infinite. Now, the legal strategy. Thorne's first phone call, arranged via an untraceable VoIP line I set up, was a masterclass in controlled aggression. Eleanor, listen carefully. We can't just release that video. It proves she is not mentally incapacitated, which is great, but it doesn't stop your cousins from claiming you coerced her, or that she has good days and bad days. We have to use the law to make her expose herself. Thorne laid out the plan. An elaborate legal heist of truth. He explained the irony of the situation. Edith was faking incapacitation to avoid legal responsibility and execute a complex change to her will without scrutiny. Our goal was to force a moment where she was compelled by a court-appointed authority to demonstrate her mental state. We file an emergency motion, not to contest the will, but to petition the court for a formal, independent, forensic neurological assessment of Edith, citing the extreme conflicting financial directives and the sudden suspicious nature of the elder abuse claim. We argue that the abuse claim is a smokescreen to rush the disposition of assets and silence you, the dissenting voice. The beauty of the plan was the ethical trap. If Edith genuinely had dementia, the court would proceed, and the family would seize control, but I would be cleared of the criminal charge as an initial act. If, however, she was forced into a high-pressure examination, and out of pure arrogant habit, she performed too well, answered the complex cognitive questions flawlessly, Thorne would then introduce my video evidence. The irony was devastating. To win her game of fraud, she had to prove she was perfectly sane and therefore guilty of calculated fraud and attempted defamation, the abuse charge. She would be forced to prove her sanity to save her reputation, only to lose the legal battle for her fortune and face criminal charges for the abuse setup. She's an addict of control, Eleanor, Thorne concluded. She won't risk having the world, or her co-conspirator lawyer, think she's a doddering fool. She'll perform. And that performance will be her undoing. I sat in the darkness of that tiny room, the mildew smell suddenly smelling like the sweet scent of revenge. The police had come and gone, their investigation of the assault pending the inevitable family intervention. But the wheels were turning. My cousins thought they had secured my silence and her submission. They were utterly, tragically wrong. I was no longer the sentimental granddaughter fighting for memories. I was the programmer of a legal counterattack, and my grandmother, the gaslighting granny, was about to meet her match, the cold, unfeeling logic of irrefutable evidence. I secured the laptop, placing it back beneath the loose floorboard, and smiled into the darkness. The real game, the high-stakes chess match for the truth, had just begun, and the opening move was a check. The silence that filled the house was no longer one of fear, but of anticipation. I was ready to raise the curtain on her final dramatic performance. I had to be strong, cunning, and completely ruthless, because I knew deep down Edith wouldn't hesitate to destroy me completely, and I wasn't going to let her win. They say when you hire a lawyer, you buy a weapon. With Silas Thorne, I had purchased a nuclear missile. The emergency motion he filed hit the family like a seismic shockwave. It wasn't about the will, not explicitly. It was a vicious, calculated attack on the very foundation of Edith's staged reality. Thorne argued with brutal clinical precision that the conflicting financial instructions given by Edith, coupled with the suspiciously timed and weakly substantiated claim of elder abuse against me, signaled a profound legal and ethical conflict regarding her competence. The petition demanded the court mandate an immediate, independent, forensic neurological assessment, a kind of mental MRI performed by a specialist outside the family circle. My cousins Mark and Patricia were furious. They saw it as my last, desperate claw at the family fortune, a final tantrum before being hauled off in handcuffs. They didn't understand the nuance. They were still focused on the $10 million. I was focused on the 2 hours of crystal clear, devastating video footage of their victim masterminding her own decline. They had painted me as the greedy, unstable one. Thorne's motion painted them as exploiters attempting to rush a vulnerable woman's estate through fraud. The judge, recognizing the gravity of the elder abuse claim versus the potentially fraudulent estate management, granted the motion. The assessment was set for precisely 1 week later, to be held at the Lake Tahoe house, a concession to Edith's supposed frailty, but in reality a concession to the stage where the final act would be performed. The court even assigned a neutral third party, Dr. Evelyn Reed, a renowned neuropsychologist, to perform the examination. Living in the house during that week was the most elaborate tightrope walk of my life. Edith, stripped of the immediate victory she craved, my arrest, doubled down on her performance. She would deliberately mess up the kitchen, then stare blankly when I asked her about it. She'd wander into the living room, point at the wall, and loudly ask, "Where is my beloved husband, George? I just saw him here, Eleanor. Why are you hiding him?" It was classic gaslighting, designed to make me doubt my own sanity and, more importantly, to ensure anyone who visited, including the caretakers my cousins had sent, would confirm her deteriorating state. My internal monologue was a constant stream of calculations. She is using the environment to bolster the lie. I must use the environment to reveal the truth. I knew, with absolute certainty, that she wouldn't fail Dr. Reed's assessment. She was addicted to being the smartest person in the room. When presented with a clinical, intellectual challenge, her ego wouldn't allow her to play the fool. She would try to impress the doctor, demonstrating her superior intellect, effectively proving to the court that she was of sound mind, and therefore criminally liable for the setup. But I needed to give her a reason to perform. I needed the stakes to be higher than just a private assessment. I needed an audience. I initiated the heist plan. Using the secure communication line, I told Thorne exactly what I needed. A family meeting, a full gathering of the vultures, to be held simultaneously with Dr. Reed's assessment. Thorne, relishing the dramatic flair, sent out a formal notice. Mandatory family meeting to discuss the findings of the court-ordered neurological assessment and the legal disposition of the Lake Tahoe estate. He included a stern warning that any failure to attend would be considered contempt in the escalating probate dispute. This was the theatrical setup for the Stone-site climax. The day arrived, a crisp, unforgiving Tuesday. Mark, Patricia, and 3 other cousins filed into the formal living room, their faces etched with nervous anticipation and barely concealed avarice. They looked less like a family and more like a hostile corporate board. Grandma Edith, dressed in a demure lavender cardigan, sat primly on the sofa clutching her lace handkerchief, the picture of elegant, fragile innocence. Dr. Reed, a sharp woman with an intimidatingly calm demeanor, sat opposite her, flanked by Thorne and the cousin's lawyer. The assessment began quietly. Dr. Reed started with soft, open-ended questions about the weather, the house, and general memory. Edith was masterful. She gave vague, sweet answers. "Oh, this beautiful house. My memory is such a bother, doctor. I can't seem to recall the year, but I know the pines are singing today." Then Dr. Reed's questions subtly shifted, becoming more complex, probing the deeper cognitive reserves. "Edith, can you explain the difference between a metaphor and a simile? Can you reverse calculate the sum of 97 minus 14, then subtract 7? Edith, sensing the intellectual challenge, unconsciously straightened her posture. The old, ruthless intelligence flickered in her eyes. She answered the mathematical problem instantly, then hesitated, forcing a slight, confused tremor back into her hand. She was calculating how much sanity to reveal. This was the perfect moment. I took a deep breath. My hands, hidden behind my back, were linked in an act of grounding. I stepped forward, interrupting the session with a voice that was calm, but carried the weight of my conviction. "Dr. Reed, with all due respect, I feel the environment of this room is leading. My grandmother feels comfortable here. I think to get a true reading of her current cognitive state, we should transition to a different setting, perhaps the study, where she conducts her private affairs." My cousins immediately protested. "Eleanor, don't interrupt. Leave her alone." But Dr. Reed, intrigued by my insistence and the palpable tension in the room, agreed. "Perhaps a change of scene is in order. It sometimes helps." We moved to the dark, masculine study. This was my theater. While Dr. Reed guided Edith to the desk, the very desk where she had staged the 2-hour AM burner phone call, I made my move. Beneath the mantelpiece, concealed by a heavy volume of obscure poetry, was the final piece of my equipment, a tiny USB thumb drive connected to the hidden surveillance hub. I smoothly inserted the drive into the study's wall-mounted flat-screen TV, a display usually reserved for stock market tickers. The screen, which moments ago showed a calming winter landscape, flared to life, showing the live feed from the camera hidden in the portrait of my dead grandfather. Mark saw it first. "What the hell is that, Eleanor?" I ignored him. I spoke to the room, my voice a low, steady drumbeat. "Grandma Edith has been performing an intricate, beautiful, and utterly heartless lie. You all believe she is a victim of a terrible disease. I believe she is the architect of a terrible crime." With a flick of my wrist, I played the video ambush by evidence was initiated. The video that flooded the room's speakers was the 2-hour AM burner phone call. The image of Grandma Edith standing straight, her face sharp and clear in the lamplight, dumping the sedatives, was projected onto the wide screen. "It's done." The ruthless voice of Edith, fully lucid, echoed through the study. "The meeting went perfectly. Eleanor is here now, the poor, sweet thing, acting as my nurse. She's isolated, but we have to move faster. The will needs to be signed this week." Silence descended, so heavy it felt physical. My cousins' faces went from fury to grotesque horror. They had been lied to, manipulated, and were watching the full, chilling reality of their matriarch's true nature unfold. Their greedy assumption that they were the victims of my grandmother's disease was replaced by the terrifying knowledge that they were merely pawns in her grand psychological game. Edith's serene composure finally cracked. She turned, her mouth agape, staring at the screen, at the portrait, and then at me. The fear in her eyes was real now, the only authentic emotion I had ever seen from her. The video continued, a hammer blow of truth. "The point isn't the 10 million, you fool. The point is control. They all think I'm losing my mind, which means they're losing theirs. They'll fight over the scraps while the true prize goes to the only recipient who deserves it." Then came the final, gut-wrenching moment. The line that proved her malice was specifically directed at me, not just the money. The screen showed her turning away from the desk, her face momentarily filled with absolute contempt. "And I will ensure that wayward granddaughter, Eleanor, gets absolutely nothing. She tried to interfere. She will pay." Mark staggered back, physically recoiling from the screen. Patricia let out a strangled sob. They weren't just shocked by the fraud. They were horrified to learn that their own ruthlessness was nothing compared to the depths of Edith's calculated cruelty. They had played her game, and she had just exposed them all as fools. Dr. Reed, the neuropsychologist, spoke, her voice measured but final. "Edith, can you explain the content of this video?" Edith, scrambling for the final thread of her performance, tried to revert. Her eyes fluttered. I don't know what that is. It's a cruel trick. I don't recall this room. I need my pills. Where is Eleanor? She pushed me. She's a liar." But the performance had lost its anchor. The moral reversal was complete. Her attempt to deny the video only confirmed her deceit. The very moment she was presented with irrefutable evidence of her sound mind, she reverted to the act, effectively demonstrating that she was choosing to feign incapacity. Dr. Reed stood up, her notepad closing with a decisive snap. She addressed the room and the lawyers formally. "My assessment is complete. The video evidence presented clearly demonstrates that Edith is of sound mind, fully capable of complex thought, high-level planning, and sophisticated deception. Her current behavior is a voluntary, staged performance designed to mislead and manipulate legal proceedings. This is not dementia. This is a deliberate, calculated abuse of the legal system and her family's trust. It wasn't me, the granddaughter, making the accusation. It was a court-appointed expert." Silas Thorne, my nuclear missile, did not waste a second. He stood, addressing the opposing counsel with the cool venom of a predator. "Counselor, the charge of elder abuse against my client Eleanor is now void. It was a fabricated charge orchestrated by your client to derail a formal investigation. We are filing an immediate motion to seize all of Edith's assets, revoke her power of attorney entirely, and petition the court for a criminal investigation into fraud and attempted defamation. This woman does not need a caregiver. She needs a defense attorney." Mark and Patricia were defeated. They stared at the screen, at the portrait, at the real monster in the lavender cardigan. I hadn't been trying to steal money. I had been trying to expose a truth so monstrous they couldn't conceive of it. The terror of the moment I thought I'd lost everything dissolved into a wave of pure, cold catharsis. The silence was broken only by my Aunt Patricia's tearful, whispered realization. She lied. She lied to all of us. She was going to cut us out, too. I walked over to the desk, picked up the burner phone, and held it up, looking directly at Edith. She didn't flinch. She just stared back, her mask of innocence finally, utterly broken, revealing the cold, hard, calculating queen beneath. She had won the game of control, but she had lost the kingdom. The gaslighting granny was finished. The truth, in the age of digital evidence, had finally definitively won, and I was standing in the ruins of the lie, finally vindicated, the moment Dr. Reed delivered her final, clinical diagnosis. This is not dementia. This is a deliberate, calculated abuse of the legal system and her family's trust. The air in the opulent study didn't just clear. It solidified into something cold and crystalline, the unmistakable clarity of absolute truth. It was the sound of a carefully constructed reality shattering. My entire family, the greedy cousins, the self-righteous aunt, the manipulative grandmother, they all froze. The gaslighting granny, for the first time in her life, was confronted by a truth more powerful than her performance. I watched Edith. The lavender cardigan still looked demure, the handkerchief still clutched in her hand, but the mask of the confused elder was gone. Her face was bare, a terrifying landscape of pure, unadulterated fury. She didn't scream or cry. She simply radiated a chilling, silent rage. She looked at me, not with the theatrical confusion of a victim, but with the focused malice of a defeated general who had just lost the decisive battle. She had underestimated the power of the technological age. She had believed her word and her social standing were enough to crush me. Silas Thorne moved with the swift, merciless efficiency of a legal executioner. He didn't offer a dramatic speech. He simply presented a court document. The evidence of systemic deception is now on record, supported by a neutral forensic expert. We are filing an immediate motion for the court to grant a temporary restraining order on all of Edith's financial assets, effectively freezing all accounts, and preventing the execution of the suspiciously modified will. Furthermore, due to the documented attempt to fabricate elder abuse charges, we are petitioning for a full criminal investigation into fraud and attempted defamation of character. My cousin Mark, who had moments earlier been ready to call the sheriff on me, finally grasped the true extent of his peril. Wait, criminal investigation? Aunt Edith, you told us. You told us Eleanor was trying to hurt you. Edith ignored him. Her silence was a final damning statement on her loyalty, or rather, her utter lack thereof. Mark and the others suddenly realized the horrifying truth. She hadn't just been manipulating me, she had been manipulating them. They had been so consumed by the $10 million house, so focused on their own slice of the pie, that they failed to see they were all sacrificial lambs in Edith's grand game of controlling the narrative. Her plot was never about securing money for them. It was about securing her absolute legacy, leaving the entire state to an obscure charity, only so she could savor the final betrayal of her entire bloodline. The mood in the room shifted from righteous indignation against me to frantic self-preservation among the cousins. Patricia, eyes red and brimming, turned to me, the same granddaughter she'd threatened with jail just hours earlier. Eleanor, you knew? Why didn't you just tell us? She was going to cut us out, too. I looked at her, and the key, power of silence, served me one last time. I didn't need to be melodramatic. I told you all something was wrong. You chose to believe the victim narrative over the facts. You chose greed over my sanity. You chose not to listen. The simple truth was a dagger. Their collective guilt and shame were palpable. They weren't sorry for my plight. They were terrified for their own financial loss and the humiliation of having been so easily played by the woman they considered a simple, frail target. The next few hours were a bureaucratic blur. Thorne ensured the court order was served immediately. The local police, now faced with a court-certified finding of intentional fraud and the fabrication of the elder abuse claim, quickly dropped all investigation into me. The officer who had been assigned to the case sheepishly approached me. Ms. Eleanor, I apologize for the initial assumption. The evidence was compelling. I simply nodded, knowing that in the battle between sentiment and surveillance footage, the latter always wins. The true logistical climax came next. Due to the finding of active, calculated fraud, The judge ruled that Edith was an immediate risk to her own estate. A sheriff's deputy, arriving with the official order, gently escorted Grandma Edith out of the house. This was the legal consequence delivered with quiet finality. Edith went peacefully, but her exit was the most profound display of her inherent arrogance. As she walked past me, the sheriff's hand barely touching her elbow, she stopped. She didn't whisper a threat this time. She spoke clearly, loudly enough for the weeping Patricia and the aghast Mark to hear every word. "You've won this round, Eleanor," she said, her voice dry as desert sand. "But you forget that a dynasty isn't about property. It's about the truth you force people to believe. You have proof, yes, but you've fractured the family forever. Now go ahead. Sell the house. See how empty that victory feels." It was a final act of gaslighting, attempting to plant a seed of doubt to taint my victory with the guilt of family rupture. But I was immune. I met her gaze, held up the burner phone I'd taken from her study, and simply said, "No, Grandma, I'm keeping the house. And I'm going to use it to clean up the mess you made. You've lost more than money. You've lost your audience." She was driven away, not to a state psychiatric facility since she was demonstrably sane, but to a private, highly restrictive medical facility, pending the outcome of the full criminal and probate hearings. She was locked away, not because she was confused, but because she was a dangerous, capable manipulator. The days that followed were the slow, meticulous process of dismantling the conspiracy. Thorne and I worked tirelessly. The sheer volume of data I had collected, not just the video, but the metadata, the timestamps, the encrypted communications, allowed us to unravel the full extent of her plan. She had been working with a shady solicitor, quietly drawing up a final will that left everything to a shell corporation, disguised as a charitable trust for canine comfort, ensuring no blood relative would ever touch the capital. It wasn't a whoop of triumph, but a deep, satisfying exhalation. My cousins, stripped of their expected inheritance, were forced to confront their own ugly motivations. Mark came to me, not begging for money, but for forgiveness. "Eleanor, I am so sorry. I should have listened to you. I saw a doctor's note and I saw dollar signs. I didn't want to believe a woman who taught me to fish could be this monstrous." "Apology accepted, Mark," I said simply. "But the truth is, you didn't just fail to listen to me. You failed to believe your own intuition. You allowed your greed to make you a puppet." It was the first small step toward healing, not with Edith, but with the remaining shards of the family. They finally saw that my fight was never for the inheritance. It was for the truth and for my own sanity and freedom. I had become the defender of the family's true legacy, not its thief. Thorne secured the official court decree. I, Eleanor, was granted temporary management of the entire estate, not as an heir, the will was still contested, but as the only relative who had demonstrated the capacity, intellect, and moral fortitude to act in the true best interest of the estate and the family. My arc was complete, from the scorned, emotional granddaughter to the court-appointed protector. The first thing I did as the legally empowered trustee was decisive. I did not sell the Lake Tahoe log cabin. The $10 million house, the magnificent symbol of Edith's power, was safe. It was too important, too beautiful, to be reduced to a bank account balance. Instead, I initiated the next phase of my long-term plan, turning the symbol of her cruelty into a force for good. I allocated a significant portion of the frozen, now-managed funds to establish a foundation. I named it the Gaslighting Victims Fund. A name that spoke volumes and ensured Edith's legacy would forever be tied to her greatest crime. The fund's mission was simple: to provide legal aid and psychiatric counseling for victims of severe familial manipulation and elder financial abuse, especially cases hidden behind facades of respectability. I was turning her poison into medicine. The estate was not being liquidated for greedy cousins. It was being transmuted into a force for social justice. My work wasn't finished. I still had to win the final probate battle and ensure Edith's attempt to defraud the family for an abstract charity was legally nullified. But the final, most satisfying realization came when I was sitting in the high-ceilinged living room of the Tahoe house, looking out at the shimmering lake. I wasn't there to luxuriate in wealth. I was there because it was the headquarters for the fund, the nerve center for my new life. On the massive, hand-carved mahogany desk next to my laptop, I placed a single object, the camera, the thumbnail-sized, high-definition lens that had been housed in the portrait of my dead grandfather. The Chekhov's gun, Merlot, was now a permanent fixture. It was a silent, potent reminder that truth is fragile, easily manipulated, and always, always hidden. Behind closed doors. Until you have the courage and the capacity to build the evidence to expose it. This wasn't just my story, it was a testament. A warning to anyone who is told they are crazy, too sensitive, or just plain wrong when their gut is screaming otherwise. Never let yourself be made a victim. Trust your instincts and then find the evidence to back them up. And that, dear friends, is why I started this channel. Because the fight against the gaslighting granny, taught me that you can't defeat deceit with kindness alone. You need capability. You need proof. If you've enjoyed this chapter of our twisted family history, remember to like this video, leave a comment with your own experiences of manipulation, and please make sure you're subscribed to Them Behind Closed Doors. And have that notification bell turned on, because next week we detail the final probate battle and how I ensured Edith's last act of spite was completely nullified. You won't want to miss the final verdict on the gaslighting granny. We are now entering the phase of the war where the smoke clears, but the real, tedious, grueling battle for the spoils begins. The grand, theatrical climax, the moment the surveillance video exposed the gaslighting granny for the fraud she was, had passed. But winning a skirmish doesn't win the war. My victory over Edith was certified in the eyes of a neuropsychologist and a local sheriff, but the final, eternal vindication had to be written in the cold, unfeeling steel of probate law. That $10 million house, the entire estate, and the very concept of justice were still hanging in the balance, contested by the echoes of her final poisonous act, her attempt to leave everything to a shell charity to spite us all. This chapter is about turning the tables not just morally, but legally and definitively, ensuring that the legacy of my competence and honesty outshone the shadow of her malice. It's about how the former tech geek, scorned and isolated, became the unquestioned guardian of the family's future. The immediate aftermath was quiet, almost eerily so. The Tahoe house, now officially under my temporary management, felt less like a gilded cage and more like a fortress. The air no longer smelled of mildew and deceit, but of possibility. My cousins Mark and Patricia were still lurking on the edges, humbled and terrified, not of me, but of the massive, looming legal abyss Edith had opened up beneath their feet. They realized their years of greedy anticipation were worth less than nothing. They were staring at a future where the only thing they inherited was legal debt and the profound shame of being played for fools. Silas Thorne, my brilliant, merciless attorney, was not one for sentiment. He wasted no time basking in the glow of the preliminary victory. Eleanor, he stated during our daily encrypted call, the criminal inquiry into Edith is open, but probate is a different animal. We have to address the current will, the one she was trying to rush through. It leaves everything to the Canine Comfort Trust. We have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that this document was created under fraudulent circumstances, not just by her, but that the solicitor involved was a co-conspirator. We need to secure the original older will, the one that mentioned the sole inheritor, and use it as the baseline for demonstrating her calculated malice. My internal monologue, echoed his focus. The original will is the key. Edith mentioned it, not because she was confused, but because she wanted to remind me of the power she held. That will, untouched by her recent fraud, must contain the truth of her past intentions. I need to find it. The search for the original will was an architectural archaeological dig. Edith, the ultimate controller, wouldn't have left a document of such importance in a simple safe deposit box. It was a trophy of her legacy, hidden in the very walls of the house that represented her power. I leveraged my knowledge of the house's blueprints, the same ones I used to place the cameras. I focused on her study, the scene of the crime. I noticed a slight discrepancy in the depth of the mahogany paneling behind the heaviest bookcase. It was a detail only a coder or an architect would spot. After hours of careful work, leveraging my meticulous patience, I found it. A hidden compartment expertly crafted and secured with a small brass lock. Inside was a heavy vellum envelope. The envelope contained the real, original will, dated 20 years prior. I opened it, my hands trembling slightly, this time not from fear, but from the weight of history. The opening clause detailed the usual division of assets, a reasonable spread among all immediate family. But the final paragraph, the one Edith had constantly alluded to, was what truly chilled me. It stipulated that if any heir ever attempted to legally challenge her mental competence or her financial decisions while she was alive, that heir would be immediately disinherited. It was the ultimate sword of Damocles, designed to keep the greedy vultures, and anyone who suspected her nature, in line. And then I saw the true Chekhov's gun. A small separate addendum, dated 10 years after the main will, stating that in the event of her death, a significant portion of the estate, including the Tahoe house, was designated to be managed by a trustee for the benefit of Eleanor, the granddaughter who has always understood the power of silence. The sheer, staggering complexity of Edith's mind was laid bare. The original will didn't name me the sole inheritor, but the addendum confirmed that in a moment of twisted paternalistic pride, she had chosen me, the quiet, observant one, to be her successor, the one who understood the power of silence. She hadn't forgotten me. She had groomed me. The threat she had whispered, "Don't you dare interfere with this, Eleanor. You will lose everything," was her final perverse test. Interfere and lose the original trust protection. Let the fake plan succeed, and the whole family, including me, would lose everything to the charity. She had built a scenario where the only way to win was to expose her entirely. The ultimate game of double bluff. I immediately sent the document to Thorne via an encrypted courier. His reaction was pure professionalism. "This changes everything, Eleanor. This original addendum proves she had a long-standing specific intent to reward your discretion. The subsequent fraudulent will, directing the assets to a dog charity, now looks less like a whim of senility and more like a malicious, calculated attempt to punish the family for their greed and you for your interference. It gives us the motive to crush the co-conspirator solicitor." The final probate hearing was set for 6 months later. During this interim period, my life was dedicated to the establishment of the Gaslighting Victims Fund. This was my personal act of the vindication, the turning of the poisoned inheritance into a powerful social counterpoint to Edith's malicious legacy. I used the Tahoe house as the fund's physical headquarters. The contrast was deliberate and delicious. The high-end luxury, the custom woodwork, and the magnificent lake view, once a symbol of ruthless, quiet wealth, now housed the earnest, bustling operations of legal aid and therapeutic counseling for the vulnerable. We helped victims secure restraining orders, navigate complex guardianship fraud, and most importantly told them, "You are not crazy. We believe you. Now let us help you find the evidence." My cousins Mark and Patricia initially watched from afar, but as the legal battle against the fraudulent solicitor intensified and the fund's reputation grew, they started to creep back in. They weren't seeking money. They were seeking absolution. Mark, who was a financial analyst, offered his services to manage the non-liquid assets of the fund pro bono. Patricia, who had a background in social work, offered to screen applications for aid. I accepted. Not out of forgiveness, but because I saw their genuine need for redemption and their capacity to be useful. I enforced a strict, transparent screening process. No more blind trust. They had to prove their competence and commitment, just as I had proven mine to the court. I was demonstrating that true leadership isn't about hoarding power, but about leveraging competence and restoring integrity, even in the most broken corners of your life. The final probate hearing was anticlimactic. Edith's lawyer, realizing the depth of the evidence, the video, the original will, the testimony of Dr. Reed, and the mounting pressure from the criminal fraud inquiry, could not win. Thorne systematically tore apart the fraudulent will, proving it was a vindictive tool of a mentally sound but malicious person, not a genuine final directive. The judge ruled to invalidate the fraudulent canine comfort will entirely. The court, citing my demonstrated capability, honesty, and commitment to converting the estate into a positive social force, officially designated me as the sole permanent trustee of the residual estate, including the Tahoe house, specifically acknowledging the sentiment of the original addendum. The Ket Hau Kong Li, the rightful outcome, was achieved. Edith, receiving the news in her private facility, sent a final cryptic note via her remaining lawyer. It contained only 3 words. The silence breaks. It was her concession, a grudging acknowledgement that my truth had finally broken her lifelong pattern of calculated silence and deceit. 6 months after the judgment, I stood in the Lake Tahoe house. The high ceilings and luxurious fittings no longer felt heavy with secrets. They were filled with the sound of ringing phones, planning meetings, and the quiet dignity of work being done. The house was now the thriving heart of the Gaslighting Victims Fund. I walked to my desk, the massive, custom-built table that was once Edith's command center. There, next to my high-tech, multi-screen workspace, was the tiny brass-cased camera, the silent witness to the truth. It was the perfect. It was a constant reminder that in the face of profound emotional manipulation, the greatest defense isn't a heart full of forgiveness, but a mind sharp enough to secure the data. I had entered this battle as the scorned, emotional granddaughter, desperate to save a house. I emerged as Eleanor, the CEO of justice, the protector of the family's assets, and the architect of a new, honest legacy. I did not sell the house. I repurposed it, turning the symbol of her power into a monument to resilience. This journey taught me the ultimate lesson, the one I want you to carry with you from this story. Longtot kan, jikem voisu, thongmin vanang luk. Kindness must be paired with intelligence and competence. You can't win a war against cunning deceit just by being nice or relying on sentiment. You have to be smarter, faster, and possess the tools to expose the lies hidden behind closed doors. Thank you for allowing me to share this confession, this true chronicle of the she-faked dementia for 10 million. The Gaslighting Granny Exposed. My story is not an isolated incident. It's a universal pattern of family betrayal and manipulation. If you've been nodding along, if your gut has been churning with recognition, please know you are not alone. And remember this, you have the power to seek your own vindication. This story ends not with a final farewell, but with a renewed commitment. I'm Eleanor, and this is Behind Closed Doors. We will always seek the truth, no matter how deeply buried or how elegantly disguised. I hope you've subscribed because next week, we are diving into the psychological profile of the classic family manipulator, drawing lessons directly from the woman who taught me everything I know about winning, my own grandmother. Don't miss it.